Almost everyone thinks dungeons are about monsters, about the goblins in the dark, the trolls under the bridge, the dragon sleeping on its hoard. But the truth is, the dungeon doesn't need monsters to kill you. The real enemy was always something much simpler. It was your backpack. Every step down in the depths, the weight drags at you. Every coin you scoop up, every weapon you strap to your back, it all slows you down. And the dungeon is waiting for that moment. The moment you're burdened, exhausted, and one step too slow. We pretend encumbrance is bookkeeping, an optional rule, a math problem you can skip. But what it really is the heartbeat of the dungeon crawl. It forces choices. Do you take food or steal? Do you haul another chest of gold, or do you drop it and run when you hear something moving in the dark? Encumbrance turns treasure into a trap. It makes you think twice before grabbing everything that glitters. It makes you feel the dungeon pressing down on you, because you can fight monsters. You can outsmart traps, but you can't outfight the weight of the world on your back. Encumbrance isn't just numbers on a character sheet. It isn't a chart you memorize or a penalty you argue about. It's the moment you're standing in a dungeon corridor with too much in your hands, and you have to decide what you're willing to leave behind. Most players imagine they'll always take the sword. It's obvious, right? A blade keeps you alive. But when the choice is steel or food, suddenly the sword doesn't look so shiny, because food buys you time. It keeps you moving through the dark. It keeps your torchbearer alive. It lets you last just long enough to find the way back out. And that one decision changes everything. You're not weaker because you left the weapon behind. You're sharper. You've got food, and the food means leverage. It means you can leave a trail, lure a beast away from the treasure, or buy off desperate men who are starving in the dark just like you. That's the truth of encumbrance. It isn't about subtraction, it's about invention. Weight doesn't just limit you, it creates play. It's the hidden rule that turns survival into energy. Treasure isn't just a reward, or experience points. In the dungeon, treasure is weight. Every coin, every gem, every chest you drag out of the dark presses down on you. It slows down your steps. It makes you louder. It makes you vulnerable, and that's when the dungeon starts to close in. The monsters don't need to outfight you, they just have to outlast you. All they need is for your torch to burn lower, for your shoulders to sag, for your legs to falter under the strain. Picture the party slipping ahead with their small bags of silver. Quick, quiet, nimble. They vanish into the torchlight, moving from the exit. But you're still back in the dark, clutching the heavy chest, stumbling as it scrapes against the stone. The torch in your hand sputters, and the shadows around you begin to move. That's the true danger of treasure. Not the traps guarding it, not the monsters lurking nearby. It's the weight itself, the greed that tempts you to take more than you can carry. Because once you're slowed down, the dungeon stops being a place you explore. It becomes the thing that swallows you whole. I once ran a game where the players became obsessed with carrying out every last coin from a dungeon recently occupied by generations of treasure-hoarding goblins. A few sacks of gold weren't enough. They wanted it all. So they did what greedy adventurers always do when they think they've beaten the system. They brought in the mules, pack animals loaded down with empty sacks, led single file down into the black corridors beneath the earth. At first, it worked. The treasure piled higher than their imaginations. They felt clever. They felt unstoppable. But then the mules started to sweat, and the smell of them carried through the tunnels. The trolls caught the scent. Not one or two, but whole bands, hungry and howling. The fight wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. The trolls weren't there for the adventurers. They were there for the animals. The pack train turned into a feast. and the players who survived only did so by abandoning everything they had carried in. Gold scattered, mules torn apart, adventurers running blind through the dark. That's the lesson of encumbrance. The more you try to carry, the more the dungeon takes from you. No one ever cleared a dungeon in one sweep, not if they played it straight. Encumbrance made sure of that. You could only take what you could carry, and that meant returning again and again, back into the dark, retracing your steps, gambling that the dungeon hadn't shifted in your absence. Every trip was a risk, every return another roll of the dice. The monsters didn't sit politely in their rooms. They wandered, they bred, they waited, and if you stayed too long, the dungeon itself began to feel alive, like it was learning from you. I once ran a game where the players thought they were clever, running treasure back in relay. They stashed the loot at the entrance and went deeper, promising themselves they'd come back for the rest. But by the third return, the passage wasn't the same. Their cachet was gone, dragged off by kobolds who'd been watching them. The players had mapped the dungeon, but the dungeon had mapped them. That's the truth of multiple runs. It wasn't reputation, it was escalation. The more you went back, the more the dungeon pressed against you, until one of you finally broke. Encumbrance didn't just shape what you carried, it shaped where you lived. Because if you're dragging sack after sack of treasure out of a dungeon, you can't just wander off into the night. You need a place to sleep, a place to stash your loot, a place to come back to when the weight of it all nearly breaks you. That's how bases are born. First, it's just a camp outside the dungeon. A few tents, a fire, maybe a mule tied to a post. Then it grows. You hire guards to watch your haul. You build a stockade. Eventually, it's no longer a camp. It's a fortress, a settlement, a staging ground for every new delve. I've seen this happen at the table. A party once hauled so much coin out of the earth that they couldn't leave it behind, so they invested in the land itself, carved out a base of operations. By the end of that campaign, their little tent city had become a town, and the dungeon wasn't just a hole in the ground anymore. It was an economy, a lifeline, a world. Encumbrance forced it, and the campaign grew roots. Of course, sometimes your base isn't just a camp in the mud. Sometimes it's a village, or a lonely keep perched on the edge of the wild. And when adventurers start hauling treasure out of the dark, that quiet place changes. Gold doesn't sit still, it spreads like fire. Inns overflow. Blacksmiths raise their prices. Beggars appear at the gates. The peasants who once ignored you now treat you like nobles, and the local lord starts wondering how much tax he's owed from your bloody work underground. Wealth breeds enemies as surely as monsters do. That's the hidden consequence of encumbrance. The more you carry out, the more the world carries in. Soon your base of operations isn't a refuge, it's a battleground. Encumbrance made one truth inescapable. You couldn't carry it all alone. No matter how strong the fighter was, no matter how clever the thief, sooner or later, someone had to shoulder the sacks, hold the torch, guard the mule. That's why every serious adventuring company grew beyond the player characters. Porters, torchbearers, men-at-arms, all of them bought and paid for with the coins scraped from the dungeon floors. And that changed the game, because once you start relying on hirelings, you're not just adventurers anymore. You're commanders, leaders. The lives of others hang on the choices you make in those corridors. Encumbrance forces those moments. It drags strangers into your orbit, and then it asks, how much are you willing to carry? Encumbrance is more than a rule. It's the hidden engine that drives everything forward. Exploration wasn't just about poking through rooms. It was about deciding what you could carry out and what you had to leave behind. That single choice turned one delve into many. It created the loop. Explore, loot, return, rebuild, and expand. And once that loop starts, the game changes. Treasure forces you back to town. Town forces you to deal with people, merchants, mercenaries, rivals, and lords. Each run deepens your ties to the world outside the dungeon. Each haul of coin reshapes the place you come back to. Suddenly, the dungeon isn't just a hole in the earth. It's the beating heart of a campaign. I've seen players fall into that rhythm. At first, they're scavengers, dragging sacks of copper out of the dark. But then they hire guards. Then they buy land. Then they build. By the time they realize it, they're no longer just adventurers. They're rulers, stewards of something bigger than themselves. And all of it flows from encumbrance. Weight creates pressure. Pressure creates choices. And those choices create the story. Encumbrance is the campaign disguised as coin. Now I know what you're thinking. Encumbrance sounds great in theory, but it's a nightmare in practice. Bookkeeping, math. Nobody at the table wants to spend 20 minutes arguing about how many torches fit in a sack. But here's the truth. You don't need spreadsheets. You just need pressure. So here are 5 ways to keep encumbrance sharp without bogging your game down. First, use slots, not pounds, not coins. BX already hints at this. A backpack might hold 6 slots, a sack maybe 15. If it fits, it counts. Second, bulk is weight. A 2-handed sword takes up as much space as a chest of coins. Don't count every pound, just the bulk. Third, rations count too. Every character can only carry a set number of meals. A week's worth of food might take up the same slot as a weapon or sack of coins. Suddenly, eating becomes part of encumbrance, because the food itself has weight. Fourth, bags get heavy fast. In 5e, ignore exact weight until a character is loaded up with 3 bags, then halve their speed. Fifth, make it visible. Ask, what are you carrying in your hands? Encumbrance isn't a math puzzle, it's a dungeon clock, one that ticks louder with every coin. Encumbrance was never just a rule buried in the back of the book. It was the pressure that made dungeons dangerous, the weight that turned treasure into a curse, and the reason your adventures grew roots. Every coin slowed you down, every sack forced a choice. Every trip out of the dungeon carved another line into the campaign. And that's why it matters. Not because of charts or the math, but because it makes the game feel real. When you know you can't carry it all, suddenly every step counts. The dungeon presses down. The torch burns lower. The treasure slips heavier in your hands. That's when you realize the dungeon isn't just about monsters. It's about what you can shoulder and what you can't. So bring it back. Bring back the backpack. Make your players sweat over what they haul out of the dark. Make them argue over the chest or the food or the weapon they have to leave behind. That's not bookkeeping, that's adventure. If you want more forgotten truths of the game, subscribe. And if you want to see encumbrance taken to its brutal extreme, step into my own RPG Killer of the Endless Wastes, coming soon on Patreon.